like to invite today Anna King, who has been here with us before. I think it was about 3 years ago, something like that. But Anna's amazing, and I love her work, so I really hope that you enjoy it too. So I'll just hand you over to Anna. Okay.
Okay, so I'm just going to tell you a bit about my work and also a bit about what it's like to be, a practicing artist as well. So I paint a lot of old derelict buildings, and kind of wastelands, industrial estates, and that sort of thing. A lot of these places are quite sort of universal looking, so you'll see them anywhere. But sorry. Yeah, they're the sort of places that you maybe pass by every day, but you kind of don't notice them. So they're sort of overlooked places on the outskirts of towns and things like that. I really like the sort of contrast between man-made and natural. So, sort of grass growing up through concrete and the kind of marks that you get of the passing of time. So it's kind of peeling paint and rusting tin and stuff like that. So I work in oil paints on paper pasted on a board, which is quite a sort of unorthodox technique. It's just something I started doing at art college in sketchbooks, and I really like the way the paint sort of soaks into the paper. And I draw into the paint with pencil while the paint's still wet. So using paper, you get a really sort of smooth surface, and you can get sort of flowing lines and nice marks and things like that. And I also like to, I'll put sort of thin washes and kind of rub it in with, a rag or whatever, and maybe leave patches of bare paper, and then kind of thicker bits of paint. So I think working like that you end up with a slightly more sort of deconstructed kind of finished painting. And I think that goes quite well with the sort of places I like to paint, these kind of unfinished looking, places where things have been left to sort of decay, and people have been there, and these are buildings that people have built, or places that people have worked, where they've kind of just been left to, and then you get this sort of random kind of organic thing happening, and I think that's what I really like. I sort of hate uniform kind of manicured lawns and things in line. So that's partly why I really like these places. I wanted to talk a wee bit about just sort of working day to day as an artist. So everybody works different, but I try and sort of keep it structured, and I go into my studio Monday to Friday, and I work there every day. So even if I'm having a really unproductive day and I don't get anything done, at least I'm there. And then you have sort of thinking time, and I'm a big believer that having the space to think and time to think is so important for making work. And so everybody goes through periods where you're not making work that you're not happy with, or things aren't going well. And I think as long as I'm in my studio and I'm thinking about it, then I can go home and I still feel like I've achieved something, even if there's no paint's gone onto paper or whatever. So because I live in the countryside, I live on the borders in Scotland, I've had to be slightly inventive with my studio spaces, and I've ended up with some quite odd ones. So this was a studio I had, it was an old squash court, which I rented a house, and this was kind of attached to it. And this sort of, I was on this big kind of crumbling estate, and I had a bit of a love-hate relationship with this studio because you can see it was massive and it was amazing. I had these big roof lights, so the light was beautiful, but then these leaked slightly and the walls just kind of crumbled. There was this trickle of sandstone, which ended up on my painting. So after that, I moved in. This was an old primary school that I rented for a while, for 6 months. And I also had a space that was through the back of it was a working mill. So it was in this this isn't actually my studio, because my studio was a little smaller. This is a room I used to photograph paintings and things, but they had this huge sprawling expanse of kind of empty buildings with again leaking roofs, although my studio was dry in that one. So, and I think all these studios have kind of influenced, you know, it has a big effect on me where I go to work every day. And I think it's so important to have a good space and have a space that you feel like you want to work in. So I see it almost as a sort of sanctuary, you know, because I walk in the door of my studio and I kind of leave everything behind, so it's almost the opposite of going to work and having a stressful day at work and then go home. So I feel like I can forget about everything else when I'm in my studio and just working and thinking, and it's just, I love that sort of peace and kind of solitude. So as well as that kind of, you know, sort of firm base, the other thing I think about working as an artist that's so important is to also kind of step out of your comfort zone and, you know, go to different places and work in other places. I think routine can sometimes be quite stifling, and it's so important for creative thinking to get out of your comfort zone and see different places and things. So that's where artist residencies come in. And my first experience of not a residency, but that sort of thing, was doing an exchange when I was at art college. So in my third year of art college, we do 4 years in Scotland, so that would be my second last year of art college. I spent 3 months in Utrecht in Holland, and it's often the way with these things that you don't realise at the time what's kind of having an influence on you. It's only afterwards that you can kind of look back and see that something had a big effect on the way you work and things like that. So at the time when I was there, I was just, you know, finding my way around this city and doing some paintings that were probably a bit rubbish. It was only afterwards, when I got back in fourth year, I started doing these landscapes with these huge skies and sort of panoramas and buildings silhouetted against the sky, and I'm sure that's come from the sort of big skies and flat landscape of Holland that I'd been living in. And also, I think I was, you know, because I'd gone to this new place, I was really engaging with my surroundings. And I've got a terrible sense of direction, and I get lost a lot. So I spent a lot of time in Holland being lost and seeing a lot more of the city maybe than I otherwise would have. So I think it had a big influence. So the first proper residency I ever did was up at Catterline, which is a little village on the Aberdeenshire coast. And I stayed in a place called the Watchy, which is a sort of little cottage studio that's it there. That's been converted to be used for artist residencies. It actually was the studio of a famous Scottish painter called Jolomo, who lived and worked there in the 50s. And she painted a lot of Catterline landscapes. Like she moved there from Glasgow and just really inspired by the village, which is sort of perched up on the cliff top. And she created loads of paintings of the sort of surrounding area before she died, sadly, a few years later. So the whole place was just full of atmosphere. You know, there was this attic that was stuffed full of paintings, and just the smell of it, the smell of oil paint and sort of old dusty books and things. So it was an amazing place to stay. And I was there for a full month. All the heating and hot water and things were done from wood-burning stoves, and all the electricity came from solar panels and a little wind turbine. So it was slightly challenging and very cold. As you can see, when I got there, I arrived in sort of 3 feet of snow, and but it was just, you know, being somewhere like that with no distractions, you really sort of focus on your work, and I could maybe see no one for about 3 days. It did end up being a little bit like a sort of bag lady, but it was really good for getting work done. So these are some of the paintings I did while I was there. So the thing that really sort of struck me about this place was, you know, the space. Because you're sort of perched on the edge of a cliff. Aberdeenshire, the land is quite flat, and then the cliffs drop down to the sea, and you just sort of feel like you're on the edge of the world. And it has quite a wildness about it as well, so, and sort of big horizons, which I like quite a lot in my work as well. So another thing about doing residencies is that what I find is it really encourages me to do sketchbook work. So I think having sketchbooks on the go all the time and doing work in them is so important. I don't always practice what I preach when I'm in my studio. I get caught up with deadlines for galleries and making paintings. So, going away somewhere new, it gives you the chance to sort of take things back to basics. And quite often, the sketches, when you're not really trying, sometimes the best things come out, if you see what I mean. So ideas can kind of creep up on you when you're not looking for them and when you're just sort of mucking about or daydreaming or whatever. So that's partly why I think sketchbooks are so important, and also going back to that same thing of having thinking time. You need to sometimes you need to be able to clear your brain to get the things you want to sort of come through your subconscious, I guess. So my next, not residency exactly, but I did a bit of travelling around East Germany. In 2007 I won an art prize that came with a fair bit of money, which allowed me to buy a camper van and go travelling I was away for about a month. I travelled around East Germany and saw some amazing old empty factories. There's tons of sort of crumbling derelict buildings there, and kind of old hotels that people have just, I think when the wall came down, they just upped and left, and so you find all this weird stuff, like people's belongings lying around. I found a big empty hospital complex. It's called Staten. I've probably seen it wrong. It's quite close to Berlin, and that was amazing. There was just sort of rooms and rooms and rooms of tiles and graffiti and sort of weird operating tables that had just been left and things like that. So I just had a sketchbook with me, oil bars and stuff like that. And I did tons of sketching, sitting in these abandoned hospital. I think it's quite famous actually because there was, I did see other people when I was in there, and you could hear them coming along the corridor, probably it felt like a quarter of a mile because it was so huge. You just hear this, someone coming towards you. But yeah, it was all of my times away and things like that have all inspired me in different ways. So I started painting quite a lot of interiors after I moved to East Germany. And that one's actually from the inside of that hospital we just talked about. This is a lovely burnt out car that I found in a factory in Classy Carlisle. This one is of an old joiner shed that was, actually found these two amazing sheds that were in the village that I was staying in. They were kind of tucked behind the houses and I'd never seen them before. I've done quite a lot of paintings of the outside as well. These big rusty tin sheds and then just huge empty space inside. I think that's a little office that maybe the manager would have sat in or whatever, and like big banks of windows. So the buildings that I like when I was painting interiors, with derelict buildings you get quite a lot of sort of really dark, sort of grotty places, and there has to be some sort of element of light and kind of beauty about it, I think, for me to want to paint it. So this is the most recent residency that I've been on, and I spent a week in this little bothy which is up near Abbeymoor in the Highlands, and this is called the Bothy Project, and this is basically a guy's art project was to build these little, sort of like off-grid artist residency opportunities, and I think he's got another two sort of spread around the country, and yeah, you can spend a week at a time there, and as you can see, it was tiny. So there was just like a really sort of small workspace. So I just took a little sketchbook with me. I kind of filled a sketchbook with work while I was there, but the sort of solitude of it and the silence, to get back to basics like that, it really sort of, I think it clarifies your thought. not to sound like an old fogey, but having so much information coming at you, internet, emails you have to respond to and all this stuff, just to get away from all that sometimes is so nice. There was very little power there was just some solar panels. And so you get into the rhythm of the days and you get up when it's light and you can maybe go to bed not that long after it's dark, and you just can kind of immerse yourself in things. And I think, it makes you think clearly, and it makes your priorities kind of come into focus. And so it was a perfect residency for me to do at the moment, because I've been painting quite a lot of kind of trees and forestry. I moved house to somewhere where there's a lot of forestry around it, and landscape, and so I've been painting quite a lot of that. I think you're always influenced by your surroundings, even if you don't realise it at the time. But there's still, that link between sort of the natural and man-made, because obviously forestry is planted, but also the parts of it that I really like are when you get a big sort of cleared site, so you get that kind of desolation, and then a line of trees against the horizon. I like it because the forestry is so sort of uniform, and then when you get sort of the randomness in it of trees falling over and things, I really like that contrast. And there's the colours. I'm really getting into sort of dark, sort of bluey, blacky, green colours that you find in the forestry as well. So that's what I've been working on quite recently. Well, the other thing I meant to say is that I have brought a big pile of sketchbooks. So if anyone would like to have a look through them at the end, you'd be very welcome. And because I usually do sketchbooks when I do my residencies and stuff, like a lot of places that I mentioned, so you'll find them in the sketchbooks. The final thing that I wanted to talk to you about was a project I did last year, which is called Unmapped, and this was a collaboration I did with a poet called Becca Sharp. So this was a really nice project for me to get involved in, because being an artist can be a very sort of solitary profession. I go to my studio every day and I work on my own, and that does suit me very well, but I think it's important not to be a kind of, not to be a lone wolf, and you need to be able to bounce ideas off people and things, and that was really nice for me about this project, of working closely with someone. So we started the project by sending a sketchbook back and forward in the post with ideas, which was a really sort of nice, organic way to begin it. So it developed quite slowly, and also you would get this package in the post. I would be getting bits of text, and then I'd do sketches in the booth and send it back to Rebecca, and it just sort of grew from there. So she originally got in touch with me. She's interested in the same sort of places that I paint, and yeah, we decided to work together. We got Creative Scotland funding to make a book and a website, a film, and I've left a copy of the book with Heidi as well, so if anyone wants to see it, the College of Scotland now. So I'm afraid I'm not going to read you out the poems, but I will show you the paintings. We did a series of 10 poems and paintings that were kind of influenced by each other. We were making the work kind of at the same time, if you see what I mean. We wanted it to be a bit like a sort of conversation between art forms, so we didn't want the links between the poems and the specific poems and paintings to be too obvious. So although they were done to be, there's a poem for every painting, we wanted it to be quite subtle, the links, and let the themes that we were looking at sort of naturally come out. So you'll notice probably that none of my paintings involve any sort of people. They're always empty of that. And one of the nice things about this project was the contrast with Rebecca's poems, is that she would put little sort of fragments of memories and little snippets of conversation maybe so the places kind of became peopled. But it was about the sort of the memory of these people that have been in these places. And she also was using the sort of language of painting, working that into the poem. So sort of textures and colours and things like that would come through in the poems as well. And from my point of view, it was really nice to make these paintings kind of responding to the poems. And it just adds, I just felt like it adds a sort of another dimension, and it really made me kind of think about these places more, I suppose. So yeah, it was a really good project for me to be involved in. So these three paintings, the poem that went along with this is really short. It's just sort of 3 tiny little stanzas long. So I wanted to do a triptych of 3 paintings to kind of echo the shape of the text. And as soon as I read that poem, I think it was one of the first ones that were finished. I instantly, I saw myself in this park in Dundee, which is where I studied, and in the snow, and just watching the snow fall, and it just reminded me so much of that place that's what these 3 paintings are sort of loosely based on. And that's the end of my talk, so if anyone has any questions.
How were your paintings exhibited with the poetry? Was it the poetry at the side?
So because my paintings are, I should have probably meant to say this in my talk anyway, my paintings I paint on board and then paste the paper onto the board, and then I coat it with shellac to protect the paper, and then I paint on that. So we had a lot of discussion about how to show the poems, to be honest, but in the end I kind of pasted them onto board, so they were quite similar to the paintings, and we kept the text quite small so that you had to sort of go up and read it, so it was still like a poem, and then just showed them alongside each other in the gallery. So it worked quite well actually, considering it hadn't been planned from the start. So.
Okay. And were they sort of available to sell as private pieces afterwards?
The poems or the paintings? Or?
Well, the combined poems and paintings.
Yeah, anybody who bought a painting from the exhibition got the accompanying poem with it on the board as well.
Questions, guys? Could I ask a little bit about your process? So you're going out and with a sketchbook, are you photographing the environment?
Yeah, I take tons of photos as well. Yeah.
And do you sort of, when you go, so do you take this back into the studio and then work with the photographs, or do you work with the sketches that you've done?
Yeah, I print out photos, and I always have loads of photos stuck up around my studio, and I have the sketchbooks as well, so it's kind of a combination of both really. I mean, the photographs are really important for me to sort of trigger my memory and things like that, so I do use them, but I also, it's so important to not be copying a photo basically, and I think it's quite easy to get sort of like sucked into that, because it's right there and it's so easy. So although I use them, I'm quite careful not to try and not to be too enslaved to the photograph, if you see what I mean.
You said that you use oil on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use any particular type of paper? Do you use sugar paper, or do you use?
It's sort of proper artist's paper, so it's wood free or whatever. And I get pretty thick stuff. I actually buy it in huge rolls from a paper place in London, so I can just roll that out, and then I can paste it on big paintings, and then it's all one piece. But yeah, I use a really sort of good quality paper. I actually used to use lining paper from B&Q. It was what I used to use, but I thought I should step it up to a more high quality paper when I was selling lots of paintings. So.
You said that you use shellac.
Mm-hmm.
Is this thin down with metal?
No, it's just straight out of it. It's quite thin anyway, the stuff I get anyway. It's shellac sanding sealer, it's called. And I was told at college that that was a good way to protect the paper. It also gives quite a nice because it's slightly sort of creamy coloured. It gives quite a nice colour on the paper. And it also means because there's some, even though they're very slight brush marks, once it's coated, you're not going onto a blank piece of paper, which I always think is slightly terrifying. So.
Is the board in contact with the paper all the time, and that's actually what you
Yeah, so it's like a MDF board, and I make a wooden frame, and then the MDF board's stuck on. And then I coat the board's coated with PVA to seal it. And then I stick the paper on with wallpaper paste after that, and then trim it and actually sand the edges a bit so that they can't sort of flick away from the board. But yeah, I think the PVA is quite important because that makes it properly welds the wallpaper paste. I think if you were sticking it straight onto just untreated board, it would maybe peel off. But I know for a fact they don't come off very easily because I rip stuff off old paintings and things, and it's always it doesn't come off very easily. So.
So do you have to leave the PVA to dry before you stick it?
Well, that's actually done in the board making process. So when I make the boards, I coat the board and then stick it onto the frame. So it's actually, it's to stop moisture getting in, to stop it warping and things as well.
Right.
What sort of scale are you working on?
So I do anything from really big paintings, like that one there is about 51 by 36 centimeters. That's a smaller square one, and that one's about sort of nearly a metre long, and anything right up to, I've done really big paintings that are sort of 240 centimetres by 80 centimetres high. So yeah, I work on all sizes. At the moment actually I'm doing quite a lot of smaller stuff. The stuff I'm working on in my studio at the moment is a sort of series of paintings, and they're all like 21 centimetres high with boards and different widths. And so they're all sort of leading into each other. It's a sort of like misty, sort of like forestry trees. And I find more and more that the smaller stuff kind of works better. I think especially, my degree show and things like that, you want to make an impact, so you just make it big. And you see it all the time in other people's degree shows as well, and it's not always your best work is not always the biggest, sometimes you can get really nice stuff on a smaller scale. And especially because I'm mucking about more with sort of trying to get a bit more texture into my paintings, and the brush strokes are more obvious when it's a smaller piece. So.
Do you ever use the watercolour texture paper?
No, I've never used that actually. No, I really like the really smooth surface. That's part of the reason why I don't really like painting on canvas, because I like that smoothness, and also the way I don't know what it's like drawing with pencil on watercolour paper, but I like the really smooth paper for getting pencil lines.
And what width are your rolls?
The rolls of paper, I think it's 2 meters wide, and really long.
I noticed that the proportions of some of your paintings match the photographs you've taken. Some of your photographs look like panoramic.
Yeah.
Just notice that. Is that something you do consciously, or is it just?
Yeah, well, I take a lot of panoramas on my camera. You can stitch them together on the computer. So yeah, I do that a lot, because it just means you can get something that looks much more like your field of vision than just a square. So I'm really a terrible photographer actually. I have a lot of technical know-how, and I'm also, I never take photographs with that good a composition, I don't think, but I do it for sort of, the things there, you can see the thing in the photo, so.
It's like what we were talking about earlier with regards to because Anna works solely as an artist, so I thought that was quite interesting, because most people seem to have, a second job, don't they, to fulfill their, their lifestyle and pay the mortgage and so forth. And I just thought it would be interesting from a student's perspective, thinking beyond education, is like how, in terms of, marketing and promoting your work, is it just based on that you're a very good painter, or is it just pot luck that you were able to be successful in your own work?
Yeah, they showed us this awful pie chart before I left in 4th year. So we used to call fine art the degree with no prospects as well. They showed us this pie chart, and there was like a little sliver of like 5% of people who were still working as artists, 5 years on. So I feel like I've been really fortunate that I've been able to do that, and I've actually been working full-time as an artist ever since I left art college. So my degree show was basically the sort of springboard for me to start doing it. And I actually sold pretty much all the paintings in my degree show, which was a lovely surprise, and had quite interest from quite a few galleries and things like that. And it all started from there. But I think it does help. You need to be professional. One of the gallerists that I had, she gave me my first ever exhibition once I'd graduated, and she did a new graduate show every year. She'd actually given me a sort of a 2-person show with someone else, and she said that she always has to ask a third extra of the art students to put work in, because a third always just never bother to come up with anything. And I just couldn't believe that I've been given the opportunity. You just be like, nah, I can't be arsed. So I think you do have to be professional, and you have to work to deadlines. And I mean, I need deadlines to get work done, because I'm as bad at procrastinating as anybody. But it is really important to sort of think of it in a professional way, and behave as if you are doing a job, even though what you're doing in your studio maybe doesn't feel like one. So basically, from galleries getting in touch with me at degree show, it's all kind of come from that. I've never actually had to really send out my CV and stuff to galleries, and I've done it a couple of times and it's never actually come to anything. I think quite often maybe they come to you, but I mean, obviously get your art out there. I would say take any opportunities you have. I don't know if any of you listened to Grayson Perry's Wreath lectures that he did recently. I would thoroughly recommend them if you hadn't. But he was saying that a lot of artists will say that you'll do something, maybe have some work in a little exhibition, and you think it's not important, but someone will see it, and that the most sort of unlikely things can end up being a springboard to you getting other work. So I would say just take opportunities that come your way, basically. Put on your own exhibitions if you want to. There's nothing to stop you doing it yourself if your work doesn't fit into the, my work is commercial, it sells in commercial galleries, but there's plenty of people's work that doesn't fit into that mould, and you can be really inventive in the ways that you make money as an artist as well, I think.
Any other final questions?
Do you use white paint, or are the white areas just paper?
No, that's, it's not white, but it's sort of grey paint, yeah. I mean,
in buildings and on several others.
Yeah, no, that's, if you see the bit in the middle where there's sort of cream showing through the trees, that's actually the paper. So that's the colour of the paper rather than it being white.
It's a limited palette as well, I know.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to, I suppose I probably change the colours to fit how I want them to be, but also the sort of places I find myself attracted to are quite often that sort of more kind of subtle colour palette, like some greys and green.
When you said you had deadlines for galleries and stuff, how does that work then? Do they sort of say, you have like an edition 1 of 20 of a certain piece of work or something?
How do you mean?
Well, does like a client come in and say, I really love that work, and then you have to produce an album? I don't know.
No, so every painting that I do it's always an individual painting. And basically I get a gallery will ask me if I want to have a show with them.
Right.
So my next show I've got coming up is in Edinburgh in March, and I'll have a room of a gallery. So basically I know the size of the room, and I know kind of how many pieces I need to produce to make a good show in there.
Right.
So it's not like it's sort of editions of things, each painting is, an individual.
So will the gallery owner sort of say to you, I'd really like you to produce 30 pieces of work, or you just sort of
Sometimes they'll give you an exact number, or they'll
Right.
say, I would like 6 pieces from you for this group show by this
Right.
date.
Yeah.
So it can be a bit of a juggling act, to be honest, because also, you know, not all paintings in a show will always sell, so you'll be getting some work back, but then you've got no idea. You know, you could be getting 20 paintings back, or 1. So it's quite a fine balance to take on enough shows that, you know, you're constantly showing work and you've got enough of a sort of platform to sell your work, but also not take on so much that you don't have time to do it. You know, I have been in the position before where I've been rushing and I've maybe had to put in a couple of paintings that I was not completely happy with, and I just hate doing that. So I really try and manage it properly so that I've got enough time to make, you know, really work that I'm really happy with. And I think I've got, you know, I've always been quite good at that, but I'm better at it now. And I've been doing it for a while.
When you have the invitations from the galleries, do you have a say in the curating of the exhibition, how they're hung, what's in juxtaposition with what?
It just depends on the gallery and how much you request. I think if I was very clear about that I wanted to be there when it was hung, I could do that. Quite often I just leave them to it. I've sort of chosen the galleries that I show with because I like them as galleries and I like the other artists that they show, and I think they do things to a high standard, so I know that it'll be well done basically. But the work I'm producing for my next exhibition, I was saying that it's a sort of series of paintings, so when I drop those off, or I'll get in touch with them and say, ask if it can be hung in a certain order, and yeah, they're usually quite happy to do that sort of thing.
So they do have room to breathe.
Yeah.
And where have you exhibited then?
So I shall work in Edinburgh at the Open Gallery. Got a gallery called Gallery Hounslow up in Aberdeen. I showed quite a lot of work in Montrose. My unmapped exhibition was in the RGI Kelly Gallery in Glasgow. We've also shown work in Harrogate at One Way Fine Art, and a few galleries sort of around England as well, so all over the place.
Have you got into any permanent collections?
No, I don't think so actually. No, the art prize I won, I think they've got a piece of my work that's in their collection, but I don't know if that counts. So no, I
It'd be
don't
nice
think
to do that,
so.
wouldn't
Yeah.
How long does it take you on each painting? Do you have different, is it not like a sort of different painting take a different amount of time or what?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends. Usually I do sort of 2 or sometimes 3 layers, so it'll be over the course of 3 days, sort of spread out, because it's oil paints, they can take ages to dry, so I'll have 1 layer dry and I'll maybe start another painting. I mean, the bigger ones in total probably take about 3 days, 3 or 4 days, and the small ones can sometimes be really quick, but they're sometimes actually the best paintings, are the ones where it just feels effortless. And it's the ones that take you ages that actually aren't always that good. So it just depends, but I mean, there's all the sort of, you know, the planning of it and the thinking about it as well, so I don't see it as just being 3 days or whatever. It's kind of a build-up of your whole practice all throughout.
Did you sketch it onto the board first, or you just
So I draw it like
into
sort of, it depends how sort of free I want it to be, but sometimes I sketch it on with paint, just sort of like, you know, sort of like light brown paint, and then kind of block in the colours, and the first layers is really important actually. You know, it doesn't, by the time you finished it, it doesn't look anything like the painting, but the sort of basics are there, and then the proper, you know, a lot of the shape of things is done with the sky, sort of like painting the sky over the trees or whatever, and then you know, the pencil line kind of comes in at the end, like into the wet paint, and that's really good for getting the sort of details and the sort of structure of it.
Is your paint always additive rather than extraction? You just paint and then remove? I'm looking at your tree bowls, and they're very effective. I'm just wondering how you do that. Do you paint the spaces between and leave it, or do you put paint on and then scrape it off?
Sometimes I do scrape it off, so with the tree trunks probably, I've done quite a lot of dark paint, and then, because I use a rag a lot when I'm painting, and with that, you know, I would scrape the paint through to get the marks of the trees and stuff, and you can get some quite nice marks that way as well. I think I'll go through tons and tons of rags. I use them all the time because I use them to white brushes and stuff as well. But yeah, it's, you know, you can get it and sort of really, you know, sort of push the paint into the paper as well. So yeah, it just depends. There's no sort of formula at all, sadly. So sometimes I'll do it with putting paint on, sometimes I'll be taking it off. It just whatever works. Making paint.
Okay, thank you, Anna. If anyone's got any questions that they'd like to talk to you
Mhm.
afterwards, that's kind.
Yeah.
Please look through the sketchbooks because they are amazing. I did have to sneak. Yeah. Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.